Good.
Hi, good evening. You're live with Faye on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Good evening to all of the people tuning in right now. We've got such a fantastic conversation and I'm so excited about it. But just a reminder to our viewers, do share this channel with friends and family who might be interested in conversations where you can actually hear people speak. Also, like, share, subscribe, so you know whenever we go live. We go live every evening at 8 o'clock. With conversations that are about issues you need to know about. Today we have one excellent conversation lined up, but before we get to that, a quick reminder to everyone to watch our new video on the Mumbai police and the impact of COVID on the Mumbai police. Remember, we've lost nearly 60 cops to COVID. 60 members of the police force in Mumbai have died because of COVID, and thousands of them have been infected. It's a really worrying situation, and we've spent a lot of time, weeks actually, researching the problem, speaking to people, speaking to family members of constables to find out what you and I can do as citizens to make the situation better. So do make it a point to watch that video and share it with other people who will be interested in that video as well. Getting straight to today's conversation, I'm so pleased to have this conversation because it's just one of those things that I felt really strongly about. Now, I remember the day that the Supreme Court read down 377 and removed the idea of the fact that homosexuality was criminal in India. And at that point, on that day, I remember having a conversation with some of the people who are on this panel this evening as well about the fact that this was the first step. And the Supreme Court had said in its judgment, and it was a beautifully drafted judgment, it said in its judgment that discrimination and bullying was not okay. And it had recommended to the government that laws should be written to make sure that bullying and discrimination of members of the LGBTQI community doesn't happen in India. Unfortunately, those laws have not been written. But we have made some progress from that first step because we are now at least having more open conversations about the idea of marriage for same-sex couples, about the idea of adoption, about legal rights, about equality in workspaces. And yes, obviously, all of that would be sped up if the laws were updated. I'm not saying changed, I mean updated, because the laws on these matters, in my opinion, are outdated and they need to be updated to what we know. When the laws are updated, and I'm not saying if, I'm saying when, things will be sped up, because as soon as something becomes a law, we all have to follow it. But in the meantime, while we wait for the government to get around to updating our laws, is there something we can do as citizens, as team leaders, as employers, as employees, as family members to make our surroundings more diverse? Now, to that effect, there is a new book out, which I just finished reading, and it's really cool. It's written by Parmesh. It's called Queeristan, LGBTQ Inclusion in the Indian Workplace. And it's a brilliant account of the argument, and this was the argument placed before the Supreme Court, in fact, about the fact that if we make our workspaces more inclusive, it's better for business, it's better for the top line, it's better for everyone, it's better for the country. In this book, Parmesh actually explores the idea historically of where we've come from and what kind of society we are, and whether this is a Western concept of, or whether we've always been open to different types of sexuality in India. He also talks about all of the other conversations, and I was just telling him about the fact that I felt like this was a chronicle of every person, every organization, every conversation, every event that has been part of the movement so far. Parmesh is with us. Parmesh, is with us this evening along with a couple of other very cool people, and we're going to talk not just about the book, but we're also going to talk about what it's going to take really to integrate LGBTQI community into the workspaces and how we can get that done. So my first guest for this evening is Parmesh, founder of the Godrej India Culture Lab and the author of this very cool book. My next guest is Sakshi Juneja. She's the co-founder of Gaysi. It's a platform for the LGBTQI voice and expression. Harish, Iyer, co-founder of the Jimme Foundation, joins us as well. and Samyuktha Vijayan, Principal Technical Program Manager at Cou-pang, which is a South Korean e-commerce setup, joins us in this conversation. I welcome all of you. Thank you for making time to talk to us this evening and helping us understand what we can all do together. Parmesh, first of all, congratulations. I was thrilled to find my own name mentioned on page 32, but it's there, so I'm very excited. Tell us about the journey of this book and why you felt this book, or what prompted you to put all of this down, because it was really, really cool to read.
So Faye, thank you so much. And I can't tell you how proud I feel to have you hold up this book. I got my copy as well. And because you have been such a champion of our LGBTQ community. You have been one of our biggest allies. And I remember that show that you did after the 2018 verdict, when you had parents, come and you had Harish and his mom, right? And you spoke about parenting. So if you ask me what spurred me to write this book, it is this whole idea of what does it mean to be a good parent, right? And in the book, I've extended this argument, right? You already said some of the things that I've written about. Being inclusive is very much in our culture. There's a whole chapter in which I kind of reverse the Karan Johar tagline of Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, where he says it's all about loving your parents. I say, actually, it's all about loving your children.
Yes.
We have, both Samyukta and Harish are in the book as case studies of parents who accepted them with so much love, and how that has really empowered them to bloom and achieve their full potential. But in terms of what made me want to write the book, it's all of these things. It's the people I was meeting, it's the stories I was hearing, it's the incredible courage that the next generation of our queer citizens in this country have in widening the idea of LGBTQ rights, thinking of intersectionality, connecting our LGBTQ struggle to other struggles, such as that around gender or the environment. So, Harish, who's here, talks about how animal rights and human rights are so connected, right? Likewise, we have so many struggles. There's a global Black Lives Matter struggle. There's an anti-caste movement in India. There are so many struggles. So what inspired me to write this was all this amazing, these voices I was seeing around me, the change I was seeing. And I said, if I can write a book about the corporate world, as a business book, as a manual, as something that can help the corporate world change, but include all of this so that it becomes a fun Bollywood masala kind of book that people like, with characters that people love, I'm going to really do something that's useful. And I'm so glad that you liked it.
Well, certainly a blockbuster, and I love the necklace. It reminds me of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's my personal hero. So it's fantastic. It's so reminiscent of the law and everything around it. I do want to ask you a couple of questions, though. You've made some very strong arguments about integrating the LGBTQ community in the workspace. And you've said, first create the strong, proper policies, then start to hire, then create a good atmosphere, and then talk about it outside your, outside of your office. Well, you also noted a lot of companies do it the other way around, right? They don't fix what's inside the company, but they are talking about it, creating Instagram filters. And you said, we don't want your Instagram filters. Thank you very much. Yeah. So do you think that there is a need right now to sort of put out this map for corporate India?
I think so, because, and I think there's nothing wrong with putting rainbow filters and celebrating pride and doing all of that. But as I write in the book, if your policies are not right, if you don't have queer people working for you, if you've not walked the talk, then the queer community will see this as being hypocritical, and we will, today it's millennials and Gen Z, right? We talk with our likes and dislikes, and very rightly so. So if you're doing the good work, then please talk about it. But you need to do the good work first, and then talk about it.
Yes.
And that's what I argue in the book. And I think the real proof of this is in hiring people, because even if you have policies, even if you have all of this, but you've not created an atmosphere where people can come and be themselves, then what is the use? Because once there are more and more queer people who are comfortable, who are creating, who are living in these wonderful queer-friendly environments, that's when the change happens, right? And I wrote it also because every day I was getting these calls, especially after the 2018 judgment. There are so many companies. I write in the book that Indian companies are not homophobic necessarily. They're ignorant. So many companies call and say, we want to do something. What can we do? So I wrote this book essentially because I used to have a morning routine in which I would moisturize and I would go for a walk and I would do all these things. But of late, I seem to be answering calls from HR managers saying, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? So I wrote this book for them saying, read the book. It gives you all the reasons to be inclusive, all the steps you can take. And if you still have any questions, then ask me.
That's fantastic. And just as you said that, the questions are already coming in. Steve Fernandez says, I'm pan and I don't know how to come out to my parents. Any advice, panel?
Yeah, I think, Harish, Sakshi would be great for Harish. This is the Harish counsels people all the time. So this is, yeah.
So Harish, Steve is pan and doesn't know how to come out to his parents. What's your advice?
I would first say that understand your parents first. I mean, where are they at this moment? Where are they in actually understanding what sexuality is, what gender is? Sometimes we need to hold our parents' hands and get them educated before we actually break the news to them about our sexuality and about gender or our sexuality. So I think, and there's also a wonderful group called Swika Rainbow Parents of India. So if your parents need support, there is support for them as well. So first wait, be patient, and don't expect miraculous reactions from them, because they will have to unlearn prejudice and unlearn heteronormativity to understand that there are other forms as well, and that takes time.
And Harish, I'm going to come back to you, but I just want to go back to Parmesh for a second. The interesting thing about this is I actually believe everyone should read this book, because in a chapter called The Alphabet Soup, and I've had this conversation with Harish many times, is it LGBTQ, LGBTQI, LGBTQI, and then there are several letters that come after that. We did, at one point, actually, and he helped us out, we just said LGBTQI plus, which means including all of the other alphabets, because we were running out of space on the screen to write alphabets. But in this book, Parmesh, you actually described the different kinds of orientation. You've described, for example, the difference between bi and pan, which I'm sure even our viewers right now don't know. Do you want to take us through that one more time?
No, I think people should buy the book. We can't give so much away. We can't give so much away. But what I do want to tell you is that, I mean, if you've read the chapter, you know that I love the fact that there are so many alphabets. I mean, we are a country of multiplicity, of being plural, the more the merrier. And that's what I say in the book. I say, whoever you are, whatever you feel like, celebrate it. You don't have to restrict yourself to one alphabet. I end the chapter by saying, pick one or pick a few. And that's the whole beauty of it, right? And I think, but for those specific details, we should get people to buy the book.
All right, if you want specific details, buy the book. Or, for that, if you're just wondering what pan is, then Google it and figure out, because the quicker you can figure these things out, the better. But Harish, I remember having this conversation with you after the 377 judgment had come out, and you said that there were a lot of brands that had made homophobic, content in terms of ads, which at that point put out rainbows and said, oh, we're celebrating Pride. And a lot of members of the community felt it was hypocritical. Do you believe that now, so further down the line, these brands should make a larger effort to fix what's in-house first?
Yes, I think what has really happened is, I'll name those brands as well. Yatra.com, they had a very transphobic ad. And then suddenly on 6th of September, we had everything that turned rainbow over there. So there were many of these brands which had that content, and I reached out to Yatra.com. I called them up. I called up the customer service. I found out where exactly their office was. I wrote to them. I didn't receive a response from them. So and it's important to reach out to these people and to tell them that, you can't just change a rainbow filter. We are willing to work with you to ensure that things get better, but you will have to make that attempt.
Absolutely. Very well said. Sakshi, Juneja, the research tells us that if you randomly pick 100 people, about 10 of them will be, members of the LGBTQI community. Would it be fair to say that the community is already in our workplaces? but we haven't really created safe and comfortable workspaces for them to be who they are. And that's really the next step.
I mean, they say given the thumb rule is 11% of given population is queer. So looking at our massive population, a lot of people are queer. And the thing is, then there are a lot of people who are questioning things. So given it, yeah, the population is huge. I would say what's happening is that people still look at the queer community from a very superficial lens. You know, not, for example, even in the media, the stories that you see out there, you know, they mostly cover gay men or certain trans issues, but, you know, like we have that whole alphabet soup, but nobody wants to dig deeper. Similarly, I feel at times it's with the corporates as well. I mean, just saying that we are LGBT inclusive does not necessarily mean they are LGBT inclusive. Everybody is different, identities are different. It is something that needs to be very well thought out. It requires a little bit of investment. Obviously, the results will be amazing. So yeah, I mean, one needs to dig deeper. And like Parmesh said, first, you know, organizations need to understand the dynamics of the queer community before going all out and saying we are inclusive. Because, I mean, you have to put the right information out there for people to even know that they are an inclusive space.
So let me ask you this, when we say inclusive, so there are two things, right? So the infrastructure-wise inclusive, which is washrooms, which a lot of our offices don't have or have not actually thought through, or people where, you know, we create safe spaces, we remove chances of bullying, discrimination, you know, any sort of harassment. In your mind, what should come first, or in your mind, what are the things that these companies should do first?
I think there's no longer a first or a second or a third step. You know, it's like after 2018 verdict, it's not now we just want marriage rights or workplace, you know, non-discrimination policies and things. We want the entire bouquet. So I would say the corporates need to do the same thing. It's no more that you give us, you know, gender neutral toilets and everything is hunky-dory. It doesn't work like that anymore. All aspects of making an organization inclusive, right from the background to the front, you know, from their, you know, making sure the employees are happy to the service they provide or the product that they put in. It needs to be something that needs to trickle from top to bottom back to the front. So yeah, I don't think there necessarily needs to be a step-by-step thing. It's something that they need to approach bang on.
Absolutely. Just to read out some of the messages that are coming in. Bharat Raval says, extra happy today with a rainbow. Tanvi D says, big hug to everyone on the panel. Bharat Raval, again, the fundamental update that our law book requires is to make it gender neutral. Of course, we need anti-harassment laws in every domain, among others. And he also says, Parmesh's sassy look in the work from home style is at its peak. I agree with you. Don't you think there should be strict action taken against powerful people who outright suggest that homosexuality can be cured without any evidence? I believe that we've had quite a few instances of that as well in our country, not the least of which was Mr. Ramdev of, you know, the Ayurvedic fame. He's not my Baba, so I'm not going to call him Baba Ramdev. I'm just going to call him Mr. Ramdev. And we've had instances where this idea that someone can be cured has driven them to suicide. So it's a dangerous thing. While it might sound funny, it's a very, very dangerous thing. Samyuktha Vijayan joins us as well. You work for a South Korean e-commerce startup, I understand. Could you tell us, you know, what, according to you, would make a workspace inclusive?
So I used to work for Amazon for a long time, for about 10 years. And then I worked for Swiggy for a year before I joined the South Korean startup. So when it comes to transgender people, right, the workspace inclusion, I think should be like slightly different when you compare with the lesbian, gay, bisexual population, simply because transgender people are often very, very visible, right? But the funny thing is, when I joined Swiggy, I was the first transgender person to join Swiggy, right? And the case is same with the South Korean startup that I joined recently. And even with Amazon. So I transitioned when I was in Seattle. And when I moved back to Bangalore, I realized I was probably one of the very few transgender people in the workspace. So which means there are not a lot of transgender people in the workplace in the first place. So the HR people do not know what policies to change, because first of all, there is no representation, right? Like when Parmesh was talking about first hire and then we can have the policies change. So that is what I would also say. First, have a conscious bias to hire more transgender people into the workspace, and then you would see that they would kind of make the request or the kind of policy changes that they need, and it is much easier to actually make those changes, right? One very interesting thing that happened when I was I transitioned on the job when I was with Amazon Seattle, right? The HR person was like very, very helpful. They've told me, so they actually had the content, of the email that a person who would transition on the job can just fill their name and some additional information. They can just send to their immediate manager or the teams and stuff like that. So the kind of sophistication that has happened in the West when it comes to making transgender people inclusive is simply because they had transgender people there who helped create those things. Another interesting thing that happened was so how changing the name is a very, very difficult thing, and it is a difficult thing everywhere. In the US also, you will have to go through a court order to be able to legally change your name, and then the documents still take time to change. Amazon had this concept of display name and legal name, right? So I could easily change my display name to be literally anything I want in just like 10 minutes. So anybody who would actually, for example, go into an internal portal to look at my profile would actually see my changed name within just 10 minutes of the change having happened, compared to taking months and years to actually change your legal name, right? Now that is an interesting point, but then unless you have had somebody who wanted to change their name before they need to come out, how would you know that you need to have a concept of display name and a legal name, right? So I think the most important thing, especially with respect to transgender people, is for corporates to actually go and actively hire those. And then when we talk about workspace, we actually do talk a lot about these private corporates, which are a little more sophisticated compared to let's say smaller companies or public organizations, right? Things are absolutely ridiculous in those workspaces, right? For example, the 2014 NASA judgment says that they advise the governments to actually have reservations both in work and educational institutions for transgender people. And I do not know even a single state government or a public institute or a private institute having had done that kind of reservation in policies. So sometimes we do have policies, we just do not have the will to execute them. So I would like all of these things to change.
Well, Samyuktha, before I go to the next question, I must tell you, I'm getting messages from people who are saying, wow, she's so pretty. So, and I agree. So, you're beautiful and you're articulate. So, mashallah, I hope you always stay that way.
One small point there. Thank you so much. Right. But I also think a lot of acceptance that I get is probably because I'm very conventionally female or conventionally pretty. And sometimes it just breaks my heart that people who are very different, who are not conventionally, pretty to look like a female, do not get the same kind of acceptance that I get, right? So thank you so much. But I would rather, have this thing about, for example, some people tell me, you don't look like a transgender person. And I ask them, do transgender people actually have horns or like, big teeth? Like, how do you know that this person is a transgender person? Right? So thank you. But I would like a lot of that to change as well.
That's really well said. We have a question from Tanvi D who says, what SOP should be followed to provide a healthy workspace for the LGBTQI community in terms of inclusive policies that can be made mandatory? Parmesh, you've actively done this at Godrej. You've advised several other organizations to do this as well. To educate our audiences to what should be done. What is your advice normally to an organization? Where do they start from? Because a lot of times, again, the heterosexual community takes a lot of things for granted. So we don't really even know what the LGBTQI community needs.
Yeah, so I've written it in the book as 6 steps that companies can take, and each step is a chapter, starting from a very basic. But even before I tell you, I've just written it as these steps in an order because the book kind of flows from one section to the other. I completely agree with Sakshi that you can't think about doing this piecemeal, right? You have to do all of that. And I say very clearly that you need to do all these steps simultaneously. Because, if you compare it to, say, the women's movement, right? For how long did you tell women, hang on a bit, wait till, it takes time. You will become equal someday. And, it's the same, right? With queer people, where a lot of people say, let's do this step by step and all of that. So I have a big issue with that. I've classified into 6 steps simply because these are 6 different kinds of things that you can do. Right from a very basic change of your policies. Even in policies, there's a range of, changes you can make. The very fundamental non-discrimination policy, all the way to a dress code policy and so on. Benefits that you offer, whether it is, same-sex partnership benefits in terms of health, or whether it is now, it's becoming very regular for companies to offer, to pay for gender affirmation surgery. It's becoming the norm even in India, and there are so many companies that are offering it. Again, in this companies, including Godrej and so many others, we are not going out of our way. The same amount of insurance that you would pay any other employee, you're just allocating that insurance money to say, if you want to use it for gender affirmation surgery, you can as well, right? So there's a range of policies you can offer. My suggestion is offer them all. Right from, of course you have the policies, but then you need to have people to take, to take advantage of those policies. So you need to actively go out and recruit queer people. Again, as Samyuktha, as Harish said, you need to go out there and indicate that you are LGBTQ inclusive.
I just have one point. If you see, most corporates have this posh thing. We have,
yes,
where you're supposed to talk about sexual harassment and any other forms of harassment. In 2012, I was still working with Amazon in Bangalore. I remember there was this, discussion. So I was still a man back then. And I was having a conversation with my peers. And, it became a heated argument because we were talking about some design stuff. And then once we came out of the room, there was this person who disagreed with me about some design stuff. He told me, hey, Santosh, back then my name was Santosh. He told me, hey, Santosh, why do you talk like a girl? Right now, it was like, I felt he was like hitting me below the belt when he was actually going to make an argument about something that we were talking about earlier. But then he was making this comment, just trying to, put me down. And I did not have a response to it at the moment. And at the moment, I also did not know that I could actually go and complain to the HR that this person is actually, making me feel very uncomfortable in the workspace by actually making comments, right? So one of the important things that I really want corporates to talk about and include in those policies is, making people understand that such things are totally unwelcome, and can be punished, right? Making such comments about gay people, or I mean, I remember there was once there was a kind of a email group where people randomly talked about things. It's just kind of fun email group, and then there were pictures of these two footballers, Messi and Ronaldo, kind of was put, and people were talking about it. And there was one person, I think a guy, who actually made a comment, Ronaldo looks better. Like, he was just making an argument, and he said Ronaldo looks better. And then immediately there was another person who made a comment, oh, that is so gay, right? So immediately we took it to the HR business partner, and then we said, see, this is a public space, and making such, for example, that guy who actually made the comment about Ronaldo was handsome or good may or may not be gay, right? And attributing to the fact that somebody calls somebody handsome immediately equals to gay, or even if that person was gay, saying that you're so gay kind of outs him out. So there are lots of issues with allowing such behavior, and you can cover all of this in your post sexual harassment or in general harassment policies, which I think is also very, very important.
Yeah, Samyuktha, completely.
Let's come in from Joylene. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I was just, Samyuktha, completely. So right from widening posh to everything, there's a range of things that all organizations have to, do them all, right? You can't do them piecemeal. And I think that's the point what all of us are trying to make fair, and to everyone who's watching, right? If you're an HR manager, don't think you can pick and choose, because straight people, no one picks and chooses the benefits, policies, etc. that straight people have, right? Straight people have them all. So there's no reason why queer people, we shouldn't have it all. And that's exactly the point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we'll come back to this, because I remember when the judgment came out and when 377 was read down, somebody came up to me in my own office and said, I don't mind, let them do whatever they want in the privacy of their homes, but why make it like a public thing? It makes people uncomfortable. And here was that, and I asked this person, you're married, why do you talk about why are you and your wife public? Why can't you just, pretend to not know each other and keep it a secret? Who wants to live like that? And why should anybody have to live like that? Why should you have to constantly hide parts of yourself? In fact, in that judgment, it said very clearly, to have to hide parts of yourself is a denial of your individuality and your fundamental rights. I think that was really beautiful. It was a really powerful sentence. A question has come in from Joylene John. She says, as a mother of a boy and a girl who are now in primary school, what should be our approach as parents if we come across anyone from the LGBTQ community in terms of communicating to our kids? Effectively, how do we talk to our kids about gay rights while they are in primary school? And I think it's an important thing for a parent to ask that question as well. That's empowering as well. Anyone on the panel who wants to answer that question?
I mean, I would say there are several books now. A lot of Indian publishers have come up with books for children on gender and sexuality. I mean, you can start by just gifting a book to your kid. It's in a very, very simpleton language. It's easy for the parent to understand, explain perhaps to the child as well. And I would say to a good extent today, you do find private schools in most metro cities focusing on gender and sexuality as part of education. I mean, Harish over here has been doing so, working with schools and educational institutions for a while now. So yeah, I think, but at times it's really just very heartwarming for us to see, you get to see tweets, etc. Gaysi gets tagged on it by, a older sister gifting a gender related book to a younger sibling. Parents doing the same. So I mean, that could be the very first step, where you just get little books, perhaps then push in schools, with the trustees and with the board over there to include gender and sexuality as part of the education system in the school as well. So yeah.
If we could get schools to include sex education to begin with, then we've had problems in Mumbai where parents' associations have come back to the school saying, we don't want our children learning this sort of thing. Harish, you've worked with schools. Have you seen a change? And what is your recommendation to moms and dads who want to talk to their kids right now?
I think children are the easiest. Children, discrimination is a taught trait. Discrimination is not what children are born with. The way we shape children's worlds is how they learn from it. I'll tell you a very small example. When I was dating somebody, I went to my 8-year-old niece, and so I was mama, and she knew only heterosexual relationships. She knew that the person who comes with mama is mommy. So Yash became mommy. So it didn't matter to her whether my partner was a boy or a man, a woman, a trans person. It didn't matter to her. For children, it's absolutely basic, and for parents to just have the idea of telling their children, anyone can love anybody, anyone can be anybody. And not enforce gender stereotypes on children, not enforce sexuality stereotypes on children, is something that we can do. And also, it's important for the parent to know that the boy and the girl that they're speaking about might not be a boy and a girl. They might grow up to be trans people. So it's important to not have gender stereotypes or sexuality stereotypes, and to just say that anyone can love anybody. It's actually that simple.
Parmesh, we have a question from Akriti B, who says, when can we expect LGBTQ people to serve in the armed forces openly and freely? Is there progress on that front? We've actually seen US pedal back, on this point as well. And I know that that's disappointing. But in India, do you think it's very far away?
I don't know. I don't know whether something is very far. I mean, I think one of the things we've learned about our country is that it often surprises us in either direction. But certainly the commentary that has come out, and I write about this little bit in Queeristan as well, isn't very helpful in terms of, so I don't think the leadership of the armed forces understands. And I write about a particular article in which, the senior leadership of the armed forces says, they were not even aware of things like homosexuality. So they didn't put it in the Army Act, which governs, armed forces behavior. But they were very uncomfortable with it. I think it would be, and this is where it's interesting, because even we had the Nalsa judgment before we had, the 2018 Supreme Court verdict. I think it would be easier in India for trans people to enter the armed forces before the wider LGBTQ population enters the armed forces. And I want to make one thing here, which we haven't spoken about yet, is with all these changes that are taking place, with all these laws that we want to change, we have to remind ourselves that we had a progressive Nalsa judgment. We've got this 2018 Supreme Court verdict, but we don't have the best Trans Act at all. In fact, the Trans Act that is out there is quite discriminatory. So while we're fighting for all of these changes, we also need to make sure that we talk about how we can amend this Trans Act to actually make it reflect the aspirations and needs of trans people more. But if you ask me about the armed forces, I think we're going to see more trans people, and we're going to see trans people enter the armed forces first, before
assuming the government decides to implement the reservation policy that the Supreme Court suggested, especially in public institutions like the army, right? One of the other things that I also have issue with is this the third gender narrative that generally runs through, right? The problem with that is, most of the lawmakers do not really understand, how to, deal with, terminology, how to deal with such changes. So I don't know how they're going to enact or even kind of implement these laws when they themselves cannot actually, use the right terminology or kind of have a grasp of the issue. For example, I think it was during the trafficking of persons bill or something in 2018, when Mrs. Maneka Gandhi made that comment about the others. She just called transgender people the others, and then kind of she looks like she sniggered at she was rolling her eyes about making such a statement. it is so ridiculous that we have had such history of transgender people and people who are very visibly gender neutral and all that for so long, and still our lawmakers do not have respect or dignity when they actually refer to the transgender people, right? So I'm really concerned how these laws really convert into anything material when when they don't even respect us, when they don't even feel like these people deserve the dignity.
Yes.
Right. So
In fact, there's a question related to that, and it's now jumped up in that chat window, so I can't figure out who asked it. But somebody asked, do we have MLAs and MPs who are from the community? Well, randomly, based on statistics, I'm sure we do. They're just not open right now. And, I'd love to see a day when we have, a gay or a trans, prime minister, or a state government led by a chief minister who is from the community. But how far away are we from that?
Actually,
one of the things that I also equate the empowerment that the law, the execution system can provide is like, so what happened to the reservation that kind of exists for the SC/ST community or the other backward community, right? So I read somewhere that during that time when the reservation was supposed to be introduced, even Gandhiji was opposed to the kind of reservation policies. Yes. But then there was our B.R. Ambedkar, who was there to kind of put forth the idea and make sure that the reservation policy was framed and introduced. Right now, we do not have a transgender person as an MLA or a lawmaker. So even though we have the reservation, requirement that the Supreme Court talks about, so we do not have anybody to actually, come in and put their foot and then actually make the law for us, right? So maybe we should start with, how some constituencies are like women-only constituencies, and we should probably have, trans-specific constituencies. So we'll actually have lawmakers representing the transgender community, and then eventually we will have these laws properly written, these rules properly framed, and then eventually that they get executed properly as well, right? So I personally,
Harish, is it about representation? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I personally think unless we have reservation implemented, there is no way that transgender people can exist in places of power where they can actually make their rules for themselves.
Harish, go ahead.
I think we have some examples. We have Priya Patil, who's there. Priya Patil has been on this show as well, and we have Apsara Reddy, who's again leading, and both of them are trans people. What's really needed is, I agree with Samyukta completely that you need this concentrated effort and an affirmative action that needs to be taken, where you constantly try and have a diverse audience when it comes to gender, when it comes to sexuality. I think the moment and we need to understand that diversity helps everybody. That is something that people need to understand. And it is not that you're doing a social service or you're trying to uplift a community. Don't come from that aspect. Come from the aspect that this is going to be helpful for everybody when there's diversity.
Absolutely. So let's take a few more questions on this, on this matter. But I just do want to touch base with Parmesh one more time. Do you believe that a reservation for the community in Parliament and in state assemblies is the way forward to actually get representation?
I think there are many things that we have to do politically, and I think while we should certainly progress, based on the recommendations of the NALSA judgment, I think moving towards a space where we create an atmosphere where reservations for our trans communities or any LGBTQ minorities becomes a reality, we have to do a lot of the other sensitization work around, right? You have to create this conversation in workplaces. You have to create the conversations in homes. You have to create these conversations in schools and colleges through our media, through the kind of things that you are doing, for example, on so many other channels as well, not just in English, right? And Hindi and so many other languages as well, so that it becomes very normal to be talking about these issues all the time throughout the course of the year, not just during Pride Month, not just around September 6th. I think if we can work on all of these in parallel, where we realize that the struggle is long and has to be fought on multiple fields, I think then we create an atmosphere where people understand more and more why we are asking for, the same rights as everyone else, right? So I think, along with this, we have to have multiple other conversations, right? Legal, social, so many simultaneously. And I mean, I talk about why all of this is already happening, right? This is why, I mean, if I know Harish has read it, and Faye, you finished it, but Samyuktha, you're getting your copy, and Sakshi read it as well. The book ends with this incredibly optimistic chapter called Queeristan, where I talk about how we're already living in this, new kind of imagination of an equal India, where there are so many politicians who are already supportive. We have to acknowledge them. There are so many queer people who might not have become MLAs or MPs, but who are spokespeople, right? Harish spoke about Apsara. There's Disha Pinky Sheikh of Vanchit Bahujan Agadi, which is Prakash Ambedkar's party in Maharashtra, who is a state spokesperson who happens to be trans. There are, trans people in power, in college principals, so many, and there are so many more queer people coming up. There are trans people like Narthaki Natraj, who was recognized in the Padma Awards last year in 2018, right? Who won Padma Shri. So, I mean, what I do in the chapter is I say that all these, we have to work on all these fronts, but let us look and recognize the incredible change, positive change that is already happening as we move ahead.
Right.
I answered your question, but like...
You did, and I have a few more comments that I'd like to read out. Bharat Rabal says, here's an opinion. Government should choose representatives from the trans community who can supervise or input on the trans bill. Without them, it won't really be justice. You're absolutely right, Bharat. I completely agree with you. Gentleman was the one who asked the question about MLAs and MPs. Ankita Das says, in the 2018 judgment, after that, General Rawat, the chief of the army staff, said, and she quotes, "Hum logon ke yahan nahi chalega." In a country where women are not seen as equals, it's a long journey to make for everyone else. Being gay is easier than being anything else, she says. So obviously, this, like pointed out, the comments that came from the leadership of the armed forces was very disheartening at that point. That these things are still being said in modern India. Shaurya says, wait until the population organizes itself, until the rainbow population organizes itself and becomes strong enough to bend the vote banks. I would love to see that in our democracy. It will be a huge deal. I agree, but for that, you need to have candidates who are openly queer, right? Or candidates who are openly gay. Then it would make sense. But right now, I don't know if candidates are strong enough or confident enough to be openly gay, because they're obviously there. I mean, if you take the sample size, then effectively 10% of that entire sample will be queer in some way. But are they confident enough to talk about it? But I just want to come back to the main idea behind the book. I'm holding it up again just to note. The main idea behind the book is the fact that while there is so much to be done in the armed forces, in parliament, in politics, in schools and colleges, it is central to the book that corporate India in the private sector lead the way, because we feel that it's perhaps most empowering and it has most elbow room to make those changes. So I want to ask the panel that question. Do you believe that corporate India can actually make that first step and then lead everybody else into that future? Sakshi, do you think that the onus should lie right now on the doorstep of corporate India?
I think the onus should be on everybody, the society at large, include corporates. I mean, we were having the conversation on politics and etc. I mean, I would say, in a country where the current government and judiciary pretty much is going hand in hand, it is something that needs to be very collectively looked at. I mean, since 2013, we've been asking our Prime Minister, since BJP came into power, asking our Prime Minister to make a statement on the LGBT community. We still haven't heard a word. So that's where we are right now. But yeah, I mean, if corporate India can do that, at the end of the day, they say money talks, bullshit walks. So if money comes in, I'm sure people will pay attention. The lawmakers, the judiciary, the political system, people would have to pay attention. So yeah, corporate India could. But then we also have to look at the fact that it is also the responsibility of perhaps, or more than responsibility, to be a great act as well. If, big corporates, Indian corporates can help that information trickle down to small and medium scale businesses as well, as something that Samyuktha brought up early in the conversation. I think it's the need of the hour. We are still looking at probably 10-15% of the population, but here a lot more has to be done in ensuring that the information is going down, trickling down to all the other sectors as well.
Very well said, Harish, Iyer. And while I also want you to answer that question about whether corporate India can actually lead this charge, Arima Bhattacharya says, I have a friend who's trans and faced sexual and verbal abuse as a child. It still haunts her. How can I help her cope up? Harish?
I would suggest go to a counselor. Ensure mental health is important. And while we can be friends and we can be the sounding board for people, there are mental health professionals who are qualified to do that. So take your friend to a mental health professional. So that's something that we all should have. Just as we have a dentist and we have a physician, we also need to have a mental health professional. And especially if you are queer, whether you're LGBTIQ, trans, anyone for that matter, you definitely need to have a mental health professional who could also be a sounding board and who will offer you some help you look at your life from a different angle, from a positive light as well. Now, coming to your other question, I think that when we're speaking about corporates, corporate India for that matter, I think the conversation doesn't begin at shouldn't just happen at the boardroom. The conversation should happen at the gate of the corporate. The people, the security persons over there, I would not say watchman, security persons over there need to be aware. I remember this one time where I had gone to a corporate and there was a trans person along with us. So the trans person and everyone was having this spirited conversation about inclusion. They were speaking all these fancy words and everything. And this trans person had not reached the corporate. We kept calling the person. You know what happened to the trans person? The person was stopped at the gate because they had all this conversation amongst the CEOs and general managers, but they didn't think about including the security persons in the conversation. So I think that's where it starts. It should be at every level, not at one level.
Yeah, that's a very powerful thing. In fact, I just got a message from a friend of mine who heads HR for a really large organization, who said that these are great changes, but they're difficult to implement immediately because you need strong and efficient management to drive this. Priorities are different in different organizations, right? Now, a lot of times you need laws to push this. Cost is not really the question here, but inclusion is. It has to be top down. I can tell you from experience that, until very recently, they would have to be, and Samyuktha, I think, mentioned this thing, POSH, which is prevention of sexual harassment. We would have to conduct seminars in the organization to teach very, very senior people what sexual harassment is. And some of the questions that would pop up in these seminars were, I wanted to frame these questions and put them up on the wall saying that, if I ask her the second time, is that harassment? If I tell her she's hot, is that harassment? Like that sort of stuff. So in that environment, and this is mandated by law, it's possible. And this HR person, who's a very senior person, says it's possible if you have a strong CEO and a strong HR head who then push it together, because there has to be a clear understanding that this is priority. And I believe that's a very important input. Parmesh, is this what you've encountered as well on the field when you've met different organizations? that the intent has to come from the top?
Completely. And I think in India, we're still very hierarchical. So we, with our politicians, with our states, in sports teams and so on, right? We are very hierarchical. So when the CEO of the company or the MD, in India, more than 70% of companies are family owned in that sense as well, right? So it's very that. So I think it's fundamental that the message comes from the top and it's clear and unambiguous. I cite the case of so many companies, whether it's Tata Steel, whether it's our own Godrej, when the CEO communicates very clearly that this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is what I expect out of you. And if you don't like this, please go work somewhere else. Godrej's journey actually began when Nisa Godrej, my boss, sent a very clear message some years ago on Ida Hobbit to every Godrej employee, saying today is International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Transphobia. Godrej stands for, equality and inclusion. If you have any issues with that, come and talk to me. So it was very clear that if you don't agree with this, be somewhere else. It's much easier than for your line managers to follow, to help. Of course, the top-down messaging has to be accompanied by everything else that we've been talking about, right? Workshops, training sessions, policies, active hiring, then going out and doing rainbow filters and all of that. But, when it comes from the top and it's clear and unambiguous, you can really move mountains. And you can see that change that has happened in so many Indian companies already when that has happened. So I completely agree with this HR person. What's amazing, and you should tell this HR friend, that right now there are so many groups of HR people who are all coming together. So you asked earlier, and even Samyukta mentioned earlier, and Sakshi also, that the concern is smaller companies, right? What's so good and what gives me hope is that there are so many of these group companies, these organizations, Great Place to Work, Society for Human Resource Management, CII, FICCI, all have understood, all have embraced LGBTQ and other dimensions of inclusion, and all are pushing that forward. So it might be a Godrej or an IBM or, a Tata Steel or Lalit Group of Hotels, which have started some years ago. But this percolation to other parts of Indian workplace has begun through these group organizations. And that's actually very, very exciting. So I see a lot of change happening in the next few years because of these organizations.
And, it reminds me of one thing that you've said in the book as well, without giving too much of it away. You've talked about how in India we hire babies, right? So when people leave, and a lot of times members of the community are escaping their homes. They come to the big cities, they're hoping to work here, they're hoping to build new identities and to grow into full human beings. So they come to us at 20, 21, 23, they're little babies and they're looking to discover themselves. So it's so important to create workspaces where they can thrive. And obviously, if they can thrive in those workspaces, they will be productive. It's good for company, it's good for business, it's good for everything. But my last question, because I've already been told I've run out of time. The last question is about this. As a woman, I've noticed a lot of hypocrisy and casual sexism. So you'll have these organizations that say, oh, we are, we're very women friendly and we encourage and this and that. And then the same organizations within their boardrooms where there's only one woman and there are 10 men will make jokes and, will make fun of women and will say ghastly things and will make you uncomfortable. But on paper, we're very friendly. So obviously there's a lot of that as well as when it comes to the LGBTQ community, where there's, on paper, we're great and inclusive, but we'll make fun of people. We'll call someone, chakka. We'll say these really uncool things. And we're not really inclusive in spirit. How do you get all employees to be inclusive in spirit? How do you stop that behavior? Parmesh?
I think it's a really long process. I think to imagine that it can happen overnight and without you doing all of these things together is, there's no magic pill. People have been talking about gender equality at the workplace for so many decades now. But you look at any Indian workplace, or you look at any Indian senior, you look at a board, or you look at top management, any company, it's between like 1 to like, the best ones are like 10% or 12% or whatever. So to imagine that we're going to reach this magic space with LGBTQ inclusion, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of efforts, including that of ours. There are so many things that we have in, like, Samyuktha, for example, at Amazon and at Swiggy started an employee resource group, which has made such a difference, right? Magazines like what Sakshi are doing. When a Gaysi puts out magazines or does plays or does events or, puts out all these resources on mental health, the kind of work that Harish, has been doing consistently for years. I don't know how, Harish, you do it, right? Consistently, but I think your work, I think, all of it put together is going to make a difference. That's how we petition schools, colleges, politicians. It's a comprehensive effort in which all of us have to play a role, especially all those you allies who are watching, right? Who are not LGBTQ, but you recognize that our struggles are your struggles because you are also fighting for something. So when you recognize that we are only truly equal when we are all equal and free to be the best versions of ourselves, and we build that solidarity across all our movements, I think then we will move towards equality in some way or the other. I don't think there's a magic pill and a magic answer. If you want one magic pill and one magic answer for 699 rupees, you can buy my book.
I love it. Shameless plugging. Okay, Harish.
I think one thing that we cannot afford to do is take our freedoms for granted. If tomorrow Godrej tomorrow decides that, from tomorrow, now that everyone is aware, now we don't want to do any trainings, we don't want to have any programs, we don't want to have any sensitizations, it'll again go back to the same thing. And we shouldn't assume that everyone is educated, everyone is aware. That assumption is wrong. And continuous process. I mean, this is going to be a continuous process, and we cannot rest at our laurels. We cannot stop at any point. We have to keep going. And this conversation, whether somebody comes and reports it or not, you should assume that there is going to be homophobia, there is going to be transphobia, there are people who are going to be bullied, and you need to keep people, be on your toes and keep educating people. It should be a part of your corporate life.
Yes. And I want the other two panelists also to give us your final thoughts. Sakshi, go ahead.
I would say when the HRs keep these sensitization talks and workshops at their workspace, I mean, try making them compulsory and not a voluntary thing. I think you can just start from that. I've seen that so many times happen. I mean, we go give workshops and talks and it's, just 5 people showing up in 7 because people assume that they are educated just because they have one gay friend. It shouldn't be like that. So yeah, I would say just start with little basic things, and there are a lot of individuals and organizations today that can help you, guide you. So there are no excuses now, basically. So yeah, so start from there.
Start from there, Samyuktha.
So one thing that I think that we should make sure everybody understands is being different is not something that we should be afraid of. And to just think that only people, like transgender people or people, who display such tendencies are being bullied, that's not really true. So I remember some friends of mine, when I went to school, somebody who is really dark skinned or somebody who has a stutter in a college where people speak English, a Tamil speaking person, they all get bullied for being different from the crowd. I think that is the fundamental, mentality change that we need to bring in, that, when somebody is different, you are not afraid of them, you don't mock them, you don't bully them, but kind of, be a little more understanding. And then when we start developing such appreciation for people being different, I think things would change a lot. That's my
That's yes, appreciation for people who are different. And I want to share a story. Nishta, who's a trans person, was on one of my shows on television. We had just done a roadblock program on Diwali where we had this conversation. It was a free-flowing conversation. And she shared a story about how once when she was on a train, there was a little child and that child's mom, and the child was curious about her and actually asked the mom in front of her, ye aisi kyun dikhti hai? And the mother actually shushed the child and dragged the child into another part of the compartment. And Nishta said that was really hurtful. And what I would have liked is if that mother had told the child, ye bhi auntie hai, jaise baki aunties hai, ye bhi ek auntie hai, inko auntie bulao. And what I thought was really powerful about that story is that a lot of people got in touch with me later saying that was an eye-opener. It seems obvious, but it was an eye-opener. And the reason why something so obvious was an eye-opener is because we don't listen, or we don't create spaces and platforms and rooms in which we give someone time to talk and give someone the patience of listening. And if we want to move forward, and we really should, because there is no going back, and only a fool would go back from where we are right now. We all must go forward. The only way to go forward is to constantly listen. Like Harish said, we can't take anything for granted. You might think you have one gay friend or one trans friend, and that makes you an expert, but it doesn't, because it's someone's entire lifetime. And we have to find a way to understand each other. And the only way to understand each other is through conversation, through patient listening, through empathy, and through logically moving forward. And this is, while yes, we'll make a list, the HR person should do it, the CEO should do it, the parliamentarians should do it, the army should do it, we should also do it within our circles of influence, wherever we are. You're a mom, you're a dad, you're a teacher, you're a boss, you're a subordinate, you're someone's colleague, you're someone's security guard. Whoever you are, you touch people's lives. So it's important for us all to listen, because with each of us moving forward, we will drag society forward with us. So every opportunity we get on this platform, at least on this YouTube channel, we're going to continue to force these conversations through. I want you to keep listening. I want to give you something to think about as you go to dinner tonight. Think about what your reaction would be if your kid tomorrow turned around and said they were gay. Think about what your reaction would be if your neighbor's kid turned out to be gay. What would you say? Would you be supportive? Would you be understanding? Would you be that safe space that someone can come to and talk about how they feel? And that really, the answer to that question, if we ask honestly in our own hearts, will tell us how much work needs to be done. So for now, of course, thank you to the panel. Thank you to the audience. You've been amazing. One last flash of the book. Read it. Slightly order it for your HR heads as well, so that they read it also. We'll put some peer pressure and we'll push this forward one step at a time. Thanks for watching, and good night.